How poor did you grow up, would you say?
Poor. We grew up poor, man. I mean, I think our rent was $150 a month, single mom, toilet hanging through the ceiling.
So your dad passed away.
Dad passed away when I was 16. He was old, but he just didn't have any money, you know? Usually your mom f***s an old rich man. You know? My mom had 4 kids with an old poor man.
After my last video, everyone's been asking me to look into these viral posts claiming Theo Von is lying about his entire backstory. Want to point out that Theo Von is not a Southerner. He's the child of a long bloodline of Polish monarchs who paid PR firms to scrub almost all public records about his father, who was not a poor welder, but a stockbroker. His name is Theodore Capitani Von Kurnatowski III. 41,000 likes on Twitter. However, the community note on the post says that Theo's father was exiled from his wealthy family after marrying his mother, and they wanted nothing to do with Theo or his siblings. So what's the actual truth? Well, it turns out his father wasn't a stockbroker, but the vice president of Swiftway Enterprises, a South American exporter based out of Louisiana who had their international trade license revoked after illegally exporting 30 tons of steel to Cuba, which shows the quantity of goods his father was dealing in, as does this Spanish document, which shows they were dealing in individual shipments worth $35,000 in the 1930s, which would be the equivalent of over $800,000 today. This wasn't the only major scandal Theo's father was involved in. While working as a reporter for The Item, a New Orleans-based newspaper, he admitted to taking bribes from Rafael Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic, accepting $500, the equivalent of $6,000 today, to write promotional puff pieces about him. This was such a big deal, it went on to be written about in the Columbia Journalism Review, and even brought up in a United States Senate hearing. But this somehow wasn't even the most outrageous story from his father's time as a journalist. His brother, Theo's uncle, took his own life in order to get the paper a scoop. Jobless reporter gives paper scoop by taking own life. After penning a note to give the New Orleans Item a scoop on this, Fritz Von Kurnatowski, 22, former college student and newspaper reporter, shot himself mortally early today on the sidewalk in front of his home on Pine Street. Asked by his brother why he did it, the dying man gasped, "I am tired." His family said he had been out of work, but he hadn't appeared despondent. After talking with his brother, he took his cousin's revolver and went out on the sidewalk where he was found with a wound in his breast. He was taken to the hospital and died a few hours later. He was a native of Nicaragua and claimed descent from a Polish noble family. And when I took a look at his death certificate, it turned out he killed himself on Halloween. On top of his other business ventures, Theo's father was also the editor of the journal Architect Builder and owned the copyright for all illustrated postcards coming out of Nicaragua. But all of this pales in comparison to what his son, Theo's older brother, was able to accomplish. The owner of over 7,000 rental properties in 6 different states, as well as the Orpheum Theater in New Orleans. He would die of a self-sustained gunshot wound in what was later deemed a hunting accident 5 months after the FBI opened up an investigation into his businesses for running like a Ponzi scheme.
The FBI appears to be investigating an alleged investment scam involving the former owner of the famous Capitani's music club. Roland Von Kurnatowski sold the club last year while facing a series of lawsuits by people who allege he had bilked them out of millions of dollars.
While running a non-profit that was supposed to provide instruments to schools, he would borrow over $500,000 in the charity's name to pay his own construction company, transferred buildings donated to the foundation into his private ownership for free, and had the charity pay over $100,000 a year in rent for buildings that he himself owned.
Pendarvis and a half-dozen other investors are now suing Von Kurnatowski. And several investors tell Eyewitness News they've been questioned by the FBI about Von Kurnatowski.
Theo claims that he never knew his older siblings, and that he resented them for letting his dad live in poverty while hoarding all of the wealth.
Yeah, I got some half-siblings. It's a little bit weird. We're not really on the same page, so we're kind of like, you know, don't really know him that good.
Mm-hmm. Is that just because you guys didn't grow up together, or?
Yeah, I think so. We're just from different generations. You know, and they never really were like into us. I think they always thought we were like these like weird kids, you know, like, yeah, I probably have a lot of like, some questions about maybe the way they treated my father and stuff like that, where they owned a ton of real estate and they're a huge real estate family, you know, an insane And he just lived in like a shithole, like, because my parents divorced when I was a little bit younger, so then I think, he lived in like this neighborhood where there were always people getting shot outside of his place, and there was like crackheads like knocking on the door at night and asking for money. Like,
but what if he's lying like people are claiming? Trying to portray this southern everyman, hiding the fact that his family's wealth and connections fast-tracked him into the industry, landing him a show on MTV at just 19 years old.
Part ghost, part human.
But Theo insists that they were such outcasts that he and his siblings weren't even mentioned when they listed his father's children at the funeral.
Yeah, I went to the funeral, and that was scary because my dad had other family kids that were now in their 70s almost, and they didn't acknowledge us at the funeral. They never really acknowledged us as like being his kids or whatever. So I remember the pastor being like, he's survived by his children. He named the kids, and I wasn't even in it. So that put me in a weird spot, I think, where I was like, who am I even, Which
I was able to verify from the obituary, which doesn't even acknowledge his father's second marriage at all. But just being a family outcast doesn't prove that he was raised poor. Just listen to him talk about growing up next to David Duke.
I used to work out with David Duke when I was growing up.
Holy shit.
We shared a back fence when I was growing up.
Holy shit.
Which actually isn't one of his outrageous stories that he just comes up with off the top of his head. I was able to track down both of their address histories and verify that they did in fact live right next to one another. I can't show you proof, as this would be considered doxing, but it's common knowledge by the locals that they lived in Bew Rivage, a subdivision that doesn't exactly look like an epicenter of poverty. But Theo claims that he was emancipated when he was 14 years old.
I think at the age of 14, my mother emancipated me, like legally emancipated me, like signing the contract and everything that just says that I'm responsible for my own actions and whatnot.
And he went on to live with several other families who took him in, which would explain him having lived in such a nice area.
Why were you emancipated at 14?
I just didn't like being at home, man. I fucking hated it.
What do you mean emancipated? Like you're on your own?
Yeah.
And then where did you go?
And then I went to live with friends. I would take a backpack to school every day, and I would stay with whoever let me stay, man.
But his father didn't die until he was 16, so why did he get emancipated at 14?
So wait, and at this time your dad is still alive?
My dad's still alive, yeah, but he lived across a lake at that time, and he was just... Yeah, and I kind of distanced myself a little bit. Not that I wanted to, I was just a teenager.
Yeah.
This was after his parents divorced, and his father started dating another younger woman who was pretty well off.
And my dad was a handsome man. He had a lovely girlfriend, Miss Maggie, and she would make us she lived in a nice place, man. I remember when I went to her place, it was like the nicest apartment we'd ever been in. Big tall ceilings, man. You could have a whole nother fucking room in the ceiling. The ceiling was so high. I said, damn, just give me a hammock. I'll go live up there. Give me 4 hammocks.
But Theo was also somehow able to afford semester at sea, which cost about $30,000, even back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I went to Malaysia one time when I was a student.
Oh, shit, really?
Yeah, we went to, what's the capital?
Kuala Lumpur.
Kuala Lumpur, yeah.
For what?
I just was a student on this thing called Semester at Sea. It's like a floating school.
Uh-huh.
And one of the stops was over there in Malaysia.
So you took a boat, over there.
Like a cruise ship. It's like a pull it up.
But this was apparently paid for by one of the Road Rules executives as a thank you for being on the show.
So the head of Bunna Murray, John Murray, and I became friends. And he said they have this thing called Semester at Sea, which is like a floating university that goes around the world. It's a cruise ship. He goes, I think you would really benefit from it. I would love to help you get on there as a student. He goes, I think I can help you get some sort of a scholarship. And so he helped me. And it wasn't a full ride or anything. I had to work in the bookstore, and I still had to pay like $12,000.
But this is when they're shooting Semester at Sea.
No, this was after they were shooting Semester at Sea. But he was familiar with because Road Rules had done Semester at Sea a few years earlier.
Theo also got on Last Comic Standing only 2.5 years after starting stand-up comedy.
Last Comic Standing, you won the respect of the whole nation. Most downloaded comic. Let's talk about that. How huge.
Most downloaded
These people
comic.
voted
Thank
for
you,
you.
guys.
How huge was that?
That was exciting, man. That was really exciting. I mean, it was. I'd only been doing comedy about 2.5 years, and then I got to perform in front of a ton of people.
Which will reinforce people's suspicion that he might have been handed certain opportunities due to his family's wealth and connections in the entertainment industry. The only evidence I found of him having any association at all with any of his half-siblings is this clip of him talking about visiting his older sister in Atlanta.
But at the time, one of them lived in Atlanta, Georgia. and I went to visit this half sister of mine, and I'd never spent any time with her. And she had a husband, this little flamenco. I think he was a flamenco dancer. You know, he would do the fancy dancing, and you know, he had real strong legs. I remember he was short, but just all muscle from the waist down. You know, just like a little centaur.
Even if Theo and his family were cut off from his wealthy older brother, wouldn't his father have amassed some wealth of his own with all of his previous jobs? Well, his sister was born with a severe medical condition, which required a liver transplant at just 2 years old. With the medical costs already in the hundreds of thousands by 1984, and Theo's dad fundraising for it in local newspapers, it's understandable how this could easily drain your life savings. But Theo's father went on to start a non-profit of his own, aiming to help others in need of liver transplants across the country, which was supported by the legislature and even had active senators sitting on its board. So I could really go either way with this whole thing. It makes sense that a man willing to steal from charity would be fine letting his father rot in poverty. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Is he another one of these pathological liar comedians? Or is the internet just blowing this out of proportion due to his recent entrance into politics? Please like the video if you enjoyed. Please subscribe. Thank you all for watching.